We're talking with Paul Snow, the CEO of Factum. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, it's really great to be here.
Yeah, we're at the Blockchain Expo North America. I'm curious about your background, Paul.
Well, I'm a farm boy, and I got an engineering degree. Spent some time at Texas Instruments doing some top secret work behind the wall. Projects that the government was denying were on board. I quit that because it turns out I must be allergic to uh, the whole top secret work process. It's very, very siloed. It takes a lot of, I don't know what it takes. You just have to learn to do your job and not really see the bigger picture. And so anyway, I quit my job and went back to Texas A&M. I eventually finished with my master's degree and got involved implementing PostScript, and then I went from PostScript to embedded systems and a bunch of other projects, wrote a rules engine for the state of Texas. A lot of the work that I did with PostScript and the eligibility determination system that I did in the state of Texas prepared me to understand scripting and these byte interpreters like what Bitcoin uses and Ethereum. So when Bitcoin showed up in 2000, when I saw it was like 2010, 2011. I was interested. I didn't really get all of the information, and so when I did get all the information, I did buy some Bitcoin pretty cheap. I told my wife I might have accidentally funded our retirement, and rolled into 2013, where I decided to start getting really involved in promoting Bitcoin. So got involved in meetups and hosting meetups in 2013, which I more or less continued today. I still participate and host a Bitcoin meetup every week on Tuesdays in the Arboretum in Austin, Texas. And I also got involved with the idea of larger events. So me and other people did some mini conferences, one-day conferences. We had the likes of David Johnston and Jason King and Eddie Trevose. He's a guy that's involved in investment for early Bitcoin companies. And we got them to sometimes Skype in, sometimes show up in person. And then we thought, well, instead of doing one-day events, why don't we do a full conference? So we did a Texas Bitcoin conference, and we've done a number of those since. But part of that was getting involved with David Johnston, and he said, why don't we create truly distributed apps? So I spent a month or two looking at the architecture that would cover the broadest set of use cases, and realized that the traditional way we do blockchain wouldn't really apply to things like digital identity, wouldn't really apply to provenance of data, data management, process control. So we designed a blockchain that would, and that was originally notary chains, and it became Factum. And that's kind of how I got to where we are today. And it is engineering, figuring out how to solve problems, sometimes reverse engineering what other people have done, sometimes just laying out what I want an algorithm to do and just beating it through until I figure out a way to make it happen. This is just what I've done my whole career.
Are there many parallels between what you were doing at Texas Instruments and what you ultimately did in blockchain?
Absolutely. I was about to say absolutely not, but what I did at Texas Instruments was a lot of really low-level assembly language and byte manipulation. You'd call it bit twiddling, looking to figure out how to stuff a certain amount of functionality into a really tight place. And honestly, most of that work had left me in the 90s because we started getting memory spaces where it just was counterproductive to be that particular. But then when the blockchain came back and I'm starting to design a blockchain again, I'm realizing, well, any byte I write is replicated thousands of times across the network. It's network bandwidth, it's costs for disk space. It doesn't seem like much until it just adds and adds and adds and adds and adds. So all that bit twiddling that I learned really early in my career was definitely applied to how to design a blockchain.
What were what are the first things you did once you learned about Bitcoin? Did you read the white paper and then where from there?
I wish I had, because if I had, I'd been buying penny Bitcoins. I let it go up a factor of 73 before or 75 before I bought in. So no, I didn't. I was kind of reading the articles, what came by me. I just didn't dig into it deeper. Partly because the descriptions that I was given don't really explain the fundamentals of the blockchain, and so I was missing pieces that, if I'd had the pieces, I'd have realized this, how powerful it was, but I didn't. But eventually, since it had survived a couple of years, I thought, oh, I really ought to read it, and that's when I just really got explosively interested in the blockchain. The San Jose conference, when that was scheduled, I spent a couple of months beforehand designing hardware to secure Bitcoin wallets and to create a powerful personal control of my Bitcoin assets. And unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, that project kind of fell apart before it ever really was. But that was the point where I just started working on Bitcoin in my head and collaborating with people and talking about people, and everything I learned was just another thing that made me more convinced this was really a powerful technology.
What sorts of things would you think about?
I'm thinking about, well, how does this scale? Where does it go? What changes are going to be necessary at some point in time? It was pretty obvious that you couldn't put all the transactions of the world on the Bitcoin blockchain, but there are ways to create data layers secured by Bitcoin that you could use to augment Bitcoin value to create that scale. And so that depends upon hashes that go in the Bitcoin blockchain that secure Merkle trees that have way more data, and maybe hashes in those Merkle trees that support more data, and creating paths, what you would have called with slag chains, creating paths between these layers. Now, that's still possible, but it's a architecture that I don't know that it would politically fly with those that manage Bitcoin and the Bitcoin code base. But absent that, I thought that the same architecture could be used to solve these problems about document management and digital identity and those things. And this is what Factom does. And it is a solution to take all the security that's in Bitcoin and apply it to just unlimited amounts of data.
Yeah, I'm curious, could you describe the early days of Factom and how that evolved?
Oh, well, the very earliest days, it was me and some paper and a computer. I worked on it a bit. There was a young college graduate that's really, really bright that I've known for probably 10 years that I actually convinced to help me write some of the early code. So me and Ethan wrote some of the early code in the protocol. We brought Jack Liu, who later went on to left us and created OneChain, a interchain operability technology, and we brought on Brian Deary and slowly other developers, and it was first just wherever you could sit, and then it was a little office in a incubator kind of setup or text shared workspace setup. Then we grew out of that, and we moved into a 3-room office. I love to give people office tours of our first office, because there was one spot in the office you could sit, and all you had to do was turn around and you could identify everything that was in the entire office.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a pinwheel. It was very small. And then we moved to a little bigger space, and now we're in a bigger space yet. It was just a slow acquisition of talent, and we have a very powerful engineering team at this point, and it's been a fun ride.
What are some of the milestones that you're proud of at Factum, and what's that led to today?
Well, Factum is running a unique consensus algorithm that's kind of a multi-leader raft, and so we were able to create a plausible multi-leader system that distributes the responsibility across, ultimately it'll distribute the responsibility of the blockchain over 65 parties. Right now we have about 28 parties, but they run double servers, so we have about that number of servers involved. In any particular block today, 29 servers contribute to each block, which means that no one block determines no one entity determines what a block is, unlike proof of work, where if you win the proof of work, you get to absolutely dictate the entire contents of the block. In this case, you've got guaranteed 29 parties that have to coordinate. And in addition to that, while you're assigning pieces of the block to all 29 servers, their responsibility changes every minute. So no one server is in control of one part of the blockchain. There's 10 servers that control one part of the blockchain over the 10-minute period. So it's distributed over 29 servers with no server having control of any part of the blockchain, which creates a very large barrier to censorship by the system. They're not supposed to, and they can't really, because not without a lot of collusion. So I'm pretty proud of the algorithm that it runs. I'm pretty proud of the algorithm that it works. It was deployed. It was part of an upgrade in 2017. We went live in 2015. It was deployed in January of 2017, and then we went fully distributed and autonomous in 2018. And that's where we are now, over a year and some number of months of complete distribution of all authority and control over parties running the system worldwide.
What are some of the more successful use cases that Factum is?
Well, on the Factum blockchain, I have to admit that perhaps the most successful use case might be the PegNet. We have a lot of users and companies that are using the PegNet, like DHS and whatnot, that prove that you could use it for IoT security, but they're not quite yet using it in scale. Those kinds of real-world applications are take many phases and quite a bit of testing and a lot of real-world deployment and experience before you can really roll it out in some heavy way. On the other hand, we all know that blockchains are a lot easier to deploy in the sense that they're kind of a closed ecosystem. We have a great deal of experience in blockchains, and by deploying the PegNet on Factum, we don't have to do any consensus. Factum will do the consensus for us, but all those anti-censorship architectural decisions we made in Factum means it can't be considered part of our protocol. Our protocol is independent of Factum, but Factum is driving the consensus algorithm that we're riding on top of. And so we were able, I started piddling in March of this year. I kind of started programming a bit more seriously in June. A bunch of other developers, both locally and worldwide, pitched in May and June. So piddling through May, started seriously in June, and they started coming on board in June, and really hit it hard in July, and it went live on August 19th of this year. That was first step was mining, and then the full protocol was completed on October 7th. And so since October 7th, about $1 million worth of factoids have been burned to create capitalization in the PegNet. So it's a big statement of people who are, irretrievably committing value into the PegNet to set up capitalization and ownership.
I mean, that's big news. So what does this mean for Factom and then also the larger blockchain space?
Well, as the PegNet becomes more successful, it certainly drives utility on the Factom blockchain. It dramatically lowers the token supply, making Factom a deflationary token, which, of course, at some point creates pressure for price. And it also gives Factom a store of value argument. You can move assets from Factom into the PegNet. From there, you can hold your value. You can, within the PegNet itself, without interacting with anybody else, you can choose your exposure. So you can hold your value to be exposed to Bitcoin or Ethereum or USD or the PEG, which is the native token of the PegNet. And you can hold it there, and as the system progresses, your value in the PegNet will grow with those assets, even gold and silver, by the way. But because it has a whole bunch of assets, it also has a bunch of currencies. So if I decide I want to pay you $50, because you're my good friend, and you're doing a podcast, and I know you're going to be really nice to me, you should have $50. Well, I can take some of my Bitcoin or my gold assets and I can convert it to USD and send it. And the first time I'm leaving my own control is when that USD goes to you, and my good friend Justin here. And this is all under self-control in your wallet without having to go to exchanges. So this creates a huge amount of value for Factom as a protocol.
Well, with this change, what's next for Factom?
Well, we're going to continue beating this. We're developing a Ethereum gateway that allow all these tokens to be traded on Ethereum and brought back to the PegNet as you will. And these assets will be in a fully auditable gateway. The gateway itself is centralized, but what happens in the PegNet, what happens in Ethereum is completely decentralized. That will allow that token to utilize all the infrastructure for Ethereum. Past that, I have plans to create some data transport layers on top of Factom, and those data transport layers will allow you to put very large documents like video or audio or libraries of data, maybe even big data, and use BitTorrent to distribute to people that want that data, and Factom to prove the authenticity of the data, and as well as examine maybe directory type information that tells users about that data. We'll add at some point security, so that you'll be able to use digital signatures to sign in and sign out of processes run by applications that allow only authorized parties to access certain data, and that will be a system that runs on the Factom protocol, so that users can basically set up private libraries, distribute data and content under control, and not have to deal with a lot of infrastructure.
Is there anything else people should keep an eye on?
Oh, well, this is just the beginning. My main point of the or main application to build on top of a data distribution system is a free and censor-free system to share information and content and index content and curate content. And so I think you should expect to see a lot of distributed oracles like we implemented in the PegNet coming on to Factom that are beyond just the prices that the PegNet show does. You can expect to see a lot of distributed content to create ways to generate subscription information like your favorite hobby. Like I'm a juggler. I could set up a podcast for juggling, a podcast for juggling, and I'll be able to put that on Factom, and nobody will be able to take down my channel, right? And I believe that'll lead to advertising systems that people can subscribe to that will provide advertising feeds and pay people, but with the efficiency of crypto, so that most of the profits of these activities go to the content creators instead of very, very large multinational corporations, the way most revenue seems to get concentrated nowadays. So there's a whole lot of things that we can do on top of Factom, and you're going to see more public projects built on Factom.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that personally. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Paul Snow, the CEO of Factom, and have a great rest of your Blockchain Expo North America.
Yeah, thank you very much, Justin, for letting me talk to you and doing the podcast and all that. And I've enjoyed talking to you several times at the conference.
Likewise. It's my pleasure.